Well, hello,
Hello.
everybody. And I am honored beyond belief. Amy is honored beyond belief for the opportunity to co-host
Yes.
Leonard Peikoff's essays with James Valliant. James, how are you doing today?
Doing fantastically, I must say. And you guys, of course, are as spectacular as you always are. I can just tell from the glow.
We
And thank
are.
you for joining us on this, our next regular discussion of a Leonard Peikoff essay.
We
And
are.
today's essay is an exercise in philosophical detection, excuse me. It appeared in the 1981 edition of The Objectivist Forum, edited by Harry Binswanger. And it's a follow-up on an article that Ayn Rand had written in 1974 for the Ayn Rand letter, and that's reprinted in Philosophy Who Needs It, which itself was a follow-up to her earlier essay, Philosophy Who Needs It. Um, the point that both Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff, just as an introduction to the whole idea, the point that they're making is that very frequently the philosophical premises of a writer are not immediately obvious. They will motivate, integrate, and convey the basic theme, but without identifying the actual philosophical premises that underlie an article or a letter to the editor or a Facebook post, a tweet from Twitter, without identifying those philosophical premises underneath, we are in a position of really not understanding where that person's coming from. And detecting those underlying philosophical beliefs is actually a skill. Peikoff compares it to the development of an X-ray vision so that you can get underneath the premises, the unstated premises. Now, of course, this can't be done if the person doesn't have an integrated philosophy and they're just randomly tossing out nonsense. And it can't be done, of course, if someone is clear and consistent about their philosophical premises and upfront with it. No, we're talking about the situation in which a complex answer to a policy issue or something, some particular issue of the day, is taken, and there is a philosophical integration to it, but that has to be seen underneath, and to get at the philosophical premises that Ayn Rand believes help shape all of a person's opinion.
It's a great point you bring out right at the beginning. Leonard Peikoff says, there are people who, there is no philosophy there. There's nothing to be detected.
Yes.
And other people who are so attached to their ideas, it's right out front and there's nothing that needs to be detected. But that's the small minority. Most people do have underlying ideas, but it's a challenge to determine what they are.
And so Dr. Peikoff takes a specific letter to the editor from a university professor that was published in the New York Times around the time of the Carter-Reagan presidential election. And it is a letter from a political conservative who opposes Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, who opposes Soviet expansionism, and appears on the face of it to be calling for more freedom, or a freedom-based approach on the part, at least, of the Republican Party. And so at one level, it could be seen as sort of friendly article. And, I think a lot of people, even maybe some objectivists reading this, might not be able to understand what's really going on here. So it might be a good idea just to start out with that letter.
Okay, yes, and I'm going to go ahead and read that. Thank you so very much, James. And before I do, though, I just want to point out the fact that when this was published in the magazine, it was published in two parts. So Leonard Peikoff gave an introduction, then he gave us the letter. So readers of the magazine could just read the letter and kind of philosophically detect for themselves what they might think. And then in the next issue, he then expounded upon the letter paragraph by paragraph. So that was really, that would have been a nice exercise of time. Of course, anybody out there can take any sort of letter that they think is a little bit obtuse and try to detect for themselves what they think that person's fundamental ideas are, or what contradictory ideas that person holds. So yes, thank you so very much for the little introduction there. Yeah, so okay, this is the exact letter. I'm not going to expound upon it while reading it. But I will, however, at the end of it, talk about a couple of different interesting word choices and some references that I think that today's audience might not know. So here you go. To the editor, hasn't the time come for the Republican Party, as it approaches a probable electoral victory, to drop the obsolete shibboleths? At the Detroit convention, former President Ford declared, quote, "We nurtured a nation of Horatio Algers." That is scarcely a model that the Republican Party would set. The recent biographers of Horatio Alger Jr. have told the tragic story of his solitary existence. Obviously, Mr. Ford meant a nation of such heroes as Alger depicted in the books like Bound to Rise. But in the coming age of conservation and husbanding of resources, shouldn't the emphasis be on freedom and the good life rather than extraordinary luck and boundless success? Then Governor Reagan promised, quote, "a crusade to make America great again." 7 or 9 of them, crusades, took place from the 11th through the 13th century, all of them miserable affairs, children marching off in collective hysteria to starvation, shipwreck, and enslavement. Knights and henchmen looting and massacring, and all ending in complete defeat, with not a single principality wrested from the infidel. Crusades always have their ideological irrationality. What the Republican Party presumably would revive is the rationality and sanity of American life, the values of Benjamin Franklin and the Enlightenment, of science rather than ideology. The slogans a party chooses are important. They set the tone for its speech and action. Lyndon Johnson's aides selected a slogan from the 14th century communistic movement called "The Great Society," romanticized by William Morris. Yet, the equality of condition that he sought involved an imbalance with freedom, liberty, productivity, and creativity. Might the Republican Party restudy Herbert Croly and Theodore Roosevelt, and perhaps, with an eye to Friedmanesque economic ideas and Wilsonian idealism, call for a new freedom or the free society? The reinvigoration of freedom in our domestic institutions merges with our foreign policy to encourage the free stirrings in countries abroad whose regimes would export the repression of freedom. Louis S. Furrer, university professor, University of Virginia, July 31st, 1980.
1980.
Wow.
So,
first blush, you'd think, on first blush, you might think this guy's kind of in our camp. He opposes Soviet expansionism, repressive regimes that are expansionist. He wants, I'm not a huge fan of Friedman, but he wants a more Friedman-esque, a more capitalistic, he opposes Johnson's Great Society. At first blush, one might think that this guy's kind of on our side.
Right.
I mean, isn't it?
Yeah, well, let me just, before we get into the expounding on this, that Leonard Peikoff does a great job, paragraph by paragraph. I just want to say shibboleths means outdated belief. So when he says, what does he say? Obsolete shibboleths, that's kind of a redundant, obsolete, outdated beliefs. Now, Herbert Croly, for those you don't know, was an intellectual leader of the progressive movement and a co-founder of the New Republic. And, Friedmanesque refers to Milton Friedman. And I just want to point out before we get into it that I'm very suspicious of any writer that starts with the kind of prephrase that includes a bunch of context and leads me to think that they might be smuggling in contradictory or invalid ideas. But in the coming age of conservation and husbanding of resources, shouldn't the emphasis be on freedom and the good life rather than extraordinary luck and boundless success? He's just smuggling in the words freedom in there all over the place. And he's using all these compound, pre-phrases, pre-clauses that are just blowing the crow in some of it.
And that's the key here. You've put your finger right on the key here. It's the smuggled in. It's the statements that sort of lead to it's sort of a tip of an iceberg that he's sort of lifting out of the Atlantic Ocean there. But you got to realize there's this huge underlying structure of philosophy that each of these brief and what he seems to take as uncontroversial statements. He just assumes the truth of them. And what he's really assuming, though, is the truth of some underlying philosophical premise. And that's exactly it. What we have to do in order to really appreciate what's being said here is get underneath the tip of that iceberg, understand what is informing statements like that. I mean, it begins with, as Dr. Peikoff starts observing here, with words like solitary.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take the actual life of Horatio Alger versus the stories that he presented, famous stories that he presented in his books. In his books, Horatio Alger tells of the plucky, industrious, hardworking, creative, determined. This kid never gives up. He comes from an absolute terrible background, poverty, no chance in life, you'd think. This is a street urchin who's never going to make it. But this kid uses his creative mind. He's never dissuaded. He keeps at it with his determination. He works hard. And so the thought is that, gee, with this pluck, determination, creativity, hard work, you can do it. And so Horatio Alger sort of became a cliche of rags to riches success.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And in the mind of many critics of capitalism, that was just a silly cliche. It's a cartoon presentation of what capitalism is. Now, the author of this is not the kind of guy that he was writing about. He had experience with a lot of street kids in his personal life, but he had a very unhappy life. And in some ways, he wasn't a good man. And his own vice, let's put it this way, led him to have an unhappy life. And so the comparison here is, gee, look at the real Horatio Alger. His life is solitary. It's doomed to loneliness.
Right.
And it belies, in effect, the reality of what the fictional assertions of Horatio Alger in his stories. Wow.
Right. So if you're an individualist, then you're going to be miserable.
Right.
Because that's what
Lonely.
it leads to. Mm-hmm.
You're doomed to loneliness. You're doomed to a solitary, forlorn existence all by yourself, just to be an individualist. As if, and he's assuming that somehow the real Horatio Alger actually was an embodiment of the virtues that he was presenting in his fiction. He proceeds then to say, well, of course, Gerald Ford was talking about the fictional Horatio Alger, not the real Horatio Alger. So why bring it up?
Right.
Unless your metaphysical belief is, no, that projection is necessarily unrealistic. The individualist is truly doomed to a solitary, lonely existence. And that's what Ayn Rand would call one of those metaphysical premises that would underlie a person's whole sense of life.
Yes.
Yes.
Professor Fuhrer wants to throw out the Horatio Alger story with Horatio Alger. But the Horatio Alger story, I don't know if I've ever read any Horatio Alger story, but I'm familiar with them because it's not just what that author put out. It's a whole type. It's Francis Hodgson Burnett. It's the poetry of Burton Braley. There are so many success-oriented authors who do Horatio Alger stories. This professor wants to say, well, that's all naive because that author didn't live up to his ideals, and those ideals, they're platonic. They're out there. This is not what republicanism is about.
Yeah, and look at the actual history of capitalism. Men like Henry Ford, John David Rockefeller, Thomas Edison, Andrew Carnegie, they all came from dire, desperate poverty. It was their constant determination, their hard work, their creative pluck, if you will. They were, in fact, the reality behind the projection in the fictional stories about Horatio Alger in reality. I mean, even to this day, people like Bill Gates and some of the richest men, Warren Buffett, some of the richest men in America today came from relative poverty by and succeeded by sheer dint of Horatio Alger type pluck, virtue, determination, creative thought, hard work, and all of those virtues. So just the way he begins that. And then Peikoff, of course, proceeds to the next sort of metaphysical assumptions, which you brought out earlier. This age where we need to have husband our limited resources. Think about that.
Yes.
That's a metaphysical assertion. Now, there were all kinds of, environmentalist thinkers who, starting in the late 60s and certainly throughout the 70s and 80s, were constantly predicting, the Paul Ehrlich types, were constantly predicting we'll be out of oil in 20 years, we'll be out of iron in so many years, we'll be out of this natural resource. And so by the end of the 20th century, it was predicted repeatedly, we would be in a desperate privation. Now, of course, that kind of Malthusian nonsense has been refuted over and over and over.
And even in 1980, when this letter was published, there were people who knew better. That was the year that Julian Simon bet Paul Ehrlich, give me 10 years. In 10 years, pick any minerals you want, and I will show you in 10 years there will be more, not less, of, I think they picked 5 resources. And of course, Paul Ehrlich lost the bet, doubled down. They never admit when they're wrong. But even in 1980, when Professor Feuer is writing this letter, the current Republicans need to be concerned about the husbandry of resources. Even then, people like Julian Simon knew better.
And 40 years on from this article, mind you, we now know of more oil and natural gas just waiting in the earth to be taken from us than we had. In fact, what we knew then was a small fraction of the existing resources that we now know, and nearly every single resource that we use. Human ingenuity has accessed more and more of the earth. Human ingenuity has made our efficient use of these resources greater and greater. So the natural progress of technology in a free society actually makes resources more abundant, not less. He's got it just exactly wrong. It's as if there are just metaphysical limits to human success here. And that is also belied by another comment he makes right there. Boundless luck. Yes. Boundless luck. As if the virtues embodied by his fictional Horatio Alger, sheer accident. When, most of the time you really can't expect it. Maybe, on your 1,000th roll of the dice or something, you'll hit it big.
Yes. And win that lottery. Yeah.
And after all, it's just luck. Completely depriving the cause and effect relationship between the virtues of determination, hard work, creative thought, and eventual success.
Right. Yeah. Here's what Leonard Peikoff says about, because he talks about Feuer says, or Fur, I forget exactly how do you say that, but
however you pronounce it.
Yeah, Feuer. So it's extraordinary luck and boundless success. But Leonard Peikoff goes on to talk about how he dismisses boundless success. And I got to tell you, this is so funny. When I read this, it's Leonard Peikoff being hilarious. Okay, yes. So I have to read this.
Oh, please.
The term success indicates the favorable conclusion of an endeavor, the achievement of a purpose or value. How then can we place bounds on success? Success as such. Should we deliberately waste some of our effort in purposeless action, or even court some outright failures?
I'm so glad I was going to definitely quote that myself. That's my favorite. Because when you say, we shouldn't be aiming for boundless success, we should put limits on our own success, court mistakes. What do you want us to do?
Yeah,
actually intentionally make mistakes so that we limit our own success?
How fun? Yeah, no.
Success has got to be a sky the limit thing. We can't put cap on our success. We go as far as we can go. That's what success means.
It's fascinating because when Ayn Rand talked about the 3 essential elements of what was wrong with republicanism at that point, one of them was cynicism, this malevolent view, the sense of original sin. And so many people that I have talked to in the objectivist movement, or just people interested in philosophy, thought that was an exaggeration. And yet here you have this is a college professor and a conservative who will then say, the boundless success of the Alger hero is unreal and impossible. In the real world, there is no, just as Peikoff explained, there is no chance for unlimited achievement. Man can take out only meager bits of value here and there. Anything more is, quote, extraordinary luck.
Extraordinary luck.
In other, and you know that Leonard Peikoff is saying this is not just, he's a cynic, he's kind of skeptical. No, this is his metaphysical belief that not just that, there aren't very many Horatio Alger heroes, but that they are not metaphysically significant. The vast majority of us have to simply accept that we live in a world where success isn't possible.
Yes.
And we have to take care of our resources and take care of each other. And that's why we need to follow these strategies of the left.
Yeah.
Well, if he was right metaphysically, we would be in, desperately husbanding our resources and making sure we didn't waste a drop of food or a drop of whatever we needed. And but that's not the way life is naturally in a free society. And, you're absolutely right. You could cite all the historical examples in the world to this guy. You could show them the rise of the middle class in America and how how it worked out for most people in a free society. Totally different. He would ignore all that. That's not a question of fact. It's a question of metaphysical premise for him. Success is just a matter of luck. It's not a matter of something that you can expect if, all other things be sure. Lightning can strike, you could get cancer, a meteor could hit the earth, I guess. But all other things being equal, barring some extraordinary thing, in a free society, those virtues will normally result in comparative success. And this guy has a malevolent view of the universe as opposed to the benevolent view of the universe that says success is what you should typically expect if you're a virtuous person in a free society. So this guy's got a malevolent universe principle. He does not believe that human virtue normally causes success. He regards success as, in effect, luck.
Exactly right. So Leonard Peikoff says, so much for the letter's metaphysics. Now he gives a prediction about where that leads the author to go.
Yeah.
But let me take just a quick moment to say thank you to Mary Aline, who is in for the super chat. As always, Mary Aline is the doyen of the Ayn Rand Center UK. Also, Michael Sweet, big contribution, $20, and says for 3 kindred spirits. Michael, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the generous.
That means a lot to the Ayn Rand Center UK because that's big money, but it also means a lot to me and Amy and Mr. Valliant. Thank you so much for that. If you contribute Super Chat, as always, this does support the Ayn Rand Center UK, helps keep the programs going. If you're not already a member, there are programs going that you want a piece of. You can become a member by going to aynrandcenter.co.uk. That's center TRE. British spellings, aynrandcenter.co.uk. Link will be in the chat. £10 a month gets you in on not just supporting all of these programs on the channel, but in on the Leonard Peikoff and Ayn Rand study groups that take place, the current Don Watkins writing group, where this masterful author of both fiction and nonfiction takes you through how to improve your own writing. There's a early Ayn Rand group, which is now moving into other fiction. You want to be part of the Ayn Rand Center UK if you're not already a member. Either way, just thank you for watching. Any super chats that come up, of course, if you ask any questions, we'll give them priority, and you do support the channel. But yes, Leonard Peikoff says, so much for the letter's metaphysics. Well, he's not done yet, is he? And he takes a moment to say, now a prediction. The author rejects the Alger hero in the name of, quote, freedom and the good life, unquote. Alger's philosophy, and presumably Mr. Ford's also, holds that the self-made individual is essential to a free country, and that his productive work is a precondition of the good life. Alger could hardly have imagined drawing a contrast between the individualist hero on the one hand and freedom or the good life on the other, but the author of the letter does draw it. How does he do that? How does he say, you've got this individualist, this great man, this man achieving success, and the good life is somehow contrasted with that? Well, what is the author's idea of the good life?
Right. What a bizarre distinction that he's drawing there, huh?
It's really a jaw dropper as you're initially reading the letter, of course, until Leonard goes through and explains it. It's really striking. And of course, with his usual humor, he says, the author, I guess, will therefore favor some kind of non-greed in ethics to be practiced with some kind of non-individualist, i.e. statist, society. He goes back to the letter. Then Governor Reagan promised a crusade to make America great. And then that just dirty insult of comparing Reagan, whatever you thought of Ronald Reagan and his claim that we'll make America great again. Where have we heard that? But still, take him at his word and take him in earnest to compare that to the crusades of the 11th through 15th centuries, these religious crusades, the slaughter of people in the Middle East.
War during medieval times that was not successful. Right. But the word crusade, and again, it was like using the real biography of Horatio Alger versus the Horatio Alger fiction. Here he's saying, well, no, what we mean is just this concrete, the Crusades of, 1,000 years ago, right? A bloody religious war that wasn't successful. But the term crusade obviously means any intense, any impassioned advocacy for a certain position or issue. Yes. Crusades have been used much more broadly than that. There was a crusade, for example, for vaccinations when they first came along. A good crusade to educate people on the wonders of vaccination and so forth. So a crusade can either be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the idea that's being crusaded for. But what a crusade does have is it has a moral righteousness to it. It has a certainty to it.
Yes.
And so in the author's view, a crusade as such, any vigorous campaign with some kind of consistent philosophical premise, some kind of moral righteousness to it, must be emotionalist, must be hysterical, must be extremist, must be a bad thing, must be even an anti-enlightenment common sense thing, an anti-science thing. Well, this is a strange thing, ideology versus science. So we want the common sense enlightenment of Ben Franklin. Well, yeah, that is an important part of the American culture and sense of life, but he contrasts that with ideology. Well, didn't the founding fathers have an ideology? Weren't they, quote, crusaders for, and emotionally justified crusaders, mind you, strongly fighting for an idea? So to him, this is frankly a part where I was confused. The founding fathers were, quote, crusaders with a moral vision, with an ideological vision. And yet he somehow contrasts ideology and such ideological crusades from a scientific enlightenment, common sense worldview like Ben Franklin's.
Well, if the world is doomed, then individuals really have no power anyway, do they? So when he says crusades always have their ideological irrationality, it gave me a deja vu moment when we were talking about Greenspan the last time that all three of us were on, and his irrational exuberance, this kind of malevolent skepticism.
That's a good connection. That's a really good connection. You hear this with economists all the time. Sure, they talk about scarce resources and the efficient use of them and stuff, but the fact is, like we pointed out, human wealth and resources actually increase as scientific and technological information increases. Even Mr. Greenspan. Wow. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, bought into that. Yep.
But what an epistemological... This kind of thing can only be understood at the level of philosophy, as Dr. Peikoff points out. In making this dichotomy between ideology and science, he must be advocating something like Auguste Comte, who said all we have is the raw fact data in front of us, or something like the pragmatists like Dewey, who said, basically we have to confront each new thing on its own as a unique, there is no such thing as an effect ideology. So it's all just a matter of probabilistic, everything is mere probabilities in effect. But in effect, it's an epistemological position. You have to understand philosophy to understand this weird dichotomy that the author here is drawing between science and ideology. So in effect, what he's saying is knowledge is inherently uncertain. Yes. In the face of this uncertain knowledge, with mere probabilities or mere sense perception data, we really can't ever generate a set of ideas that could inspire a moral or emotional crusade, which must necessarily be irrational.
Yes.
Right.
That is an assault on reason. That is an assault on philosophy. That is an assault on having any moral answer to any moral question, as Dr. Peikoff points out.
Yes. Oh, well said, James.
Well, thank you.
I just have to say real quick is that going through this last night when I read this, it was such a pleasure. It was so much fun. Leonard Peikoff's so amazing.
Yeah, he sums up this epistemological point. Observe the letter's consistency. To this point, just as man is to abandon boundless success, the Horatio Alger, so in effect he is to abandon boundless truth and confine himself to tentative or out of context concretes. And yet, coming to 2022, how many people tell us, well, the problem is that you ideologues believe in certainty, and we understand everything is contingent. Everything is just a probability. Nothing approaches one. Nothing approaches certainty. And what does that do to the fight? What does that do to us if we don't really believe anything?
Right.
We get letters like Professor Fuhr 41 years ago.
And I guess we can now add a little footnote to a new prediction here. This kind of guy not only has these metaphysical and epistemological premises that'll probably lead to a statist politics, but now we have this uncertain knowledge thingy. So he's going to be a middle of the roader. He's not going to be going for extreme solutions. He's going to be looking for compromise everywhere. Nobody can be sure, so let's kind of find a middle ground, seems to be the implication. And I can predict, and Leonard Peikoff predicts, that this guy is going to have that kind of a politics too.
Yes.
Yes.
And where has that led us? How many people tell us, having come in with this pragmatist perspective and telling us you've got to be pragmatic, you've got to be, let's put up the air quotes here, practical. And yet the same people say, and that's the way we've been fighting for 41 or for 141 years. And somehow people don't believe it. Somehow people won't get on board. I guess people are stupid. People are sheep. People are corrupt. What can you do when you have to deal with people? Well, maybe the problem was this pragmatic approach.
Given the ideological clarity of so many people who oppose the free market, right? Any compromising position, which is so typical of people on the right, is in effect caving in to, and look, no wonder over the next century, the conservatives were losing against capital, losing. We're getting more and more socialism. Compromise is the way to lose slowly.
Yes. As Ayn Rand observed, in any conflict, the between two principles, the person who compromises the most is the one who loses. The one who upholds their principles is the one, regardless of the truth or falsity of the principles. If that's the conflict, those people who stick to their principles are going to win.
And so, ka-ching, we get to the cash value, the political cash value at the end of the professor's letter, where he cites, where this conservative cites figures from all of them progressives. All the leaders of the birth of the progressive movement in America are cited as his heroes. As you pointed out, he praises Herbert Crowley, the founder of the New Republic, who was an important advisor to these progressive politicians. But this guy was a student of Josiah Royce, one of the leading Hegelian voices in America in the 19th century, a person who was an advocate of the philosophy of Auguste Comte, the guy who coined the term altruism, also the positivist who thought we were limited to just raw sense data. Further, Teddy Roosevelt, the trust buster, the military interventionist, the first president who really opposed the free market in a way, of course, a Republican, was the first president to oppose the free market in a systematic way among all of our presidents. And who else? Woodrow Wilson, the guy that gave us the income tax, the Federal Reserve, and got us into that senseless, bloody World War I, which caused nothing but destruction. And what did he do it for? Not for American interests, as Peikoff points out, but for international altruistic reasons. So these guys, Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Crowley, these are the fathers of American progressivism. And as Peikoff points out, every single progressive movement, for, you name it, the New Deal, the New Left of the 60s and 70s, all the way up to current progressive, intersectional progressivism, has all basically been founded on the foundation, the bricks laid by these progressive men. So it is extraordinary to me. He's relying, I think, on the professor in the letter here is relying on a certain degree of ignorance. Look at the Republicans who love Teddy Roosevelt to this day. The late John McCain, it was his hero. Trump, he was a hero too. And so these vicious sort of internationalist militarist combined with anti-capitalist progressivism is a hero to Republicans?
Right. So yeah, this Professor Fuhrer, he wants to bake the statist progressive cake, but then he says, that we could perhaps going to have an eye toward Friedman-esque economic ideas. So he wants to bake the statist cake, and then he wants to frost the cake with some statism. But then the decorations you could put on it, there can be those can be Friedman-esque. I mean, what?
Well, what you're in effect left with is we need a balance.
Yeah.
We can go for some Friedman-esque ideas that are sort of capitalist, but we have to condition that with our understanding of, the values of these earlier progressives. This, after all, we don't have unlimited resources, as he points out. We have to husband our resources, as he points out. We can't expect normally success from hard work and creative thought and determination. No. Given that metaphysics, given that epistemology, it leads directly to this notion, this middle of the road compromise notion. What we don't want to do is go too far in the Lyndon Johnson direction, and we don't want to go too far in the Friedman direction. So we have to find some kind of, compromise, some balance, some middle of the road. A little poison, and a little nutritious food comes out to be his end of the day policy. And of course, as Ayn Rand points out, the poison always wins.
Yes, because underneath all of the pragmatism is we don't want to be too philosophical. We don't want to be too consistent. We don't want to be principled. We don't want to claim we advocate for certainty. People would laugh at us if we did that. And after all, I'm a college professor. Apollo Zeus in the chat says, Theodore Roosevelt is a hero to some because of his macho-ness. Yes, macho, and forget the principles. He fights. He fights. We got to love this guy because he fights. Wait, am I talking about our last president? It doesn't matter. He's tough. He fights. What can you do when you have to deal with people?
That's it. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So what's wonderful about this example that Dr. Peikoff takes us through is that at first blush, someone who is, friendly to capitalism might think, oh, well, this guy may be a little confused. I'm not sure what his premises are, but he's mostly on our side, or at least a little bit on our side. Someone we can work with, you see, someone who's not dangerous for us to ally ourselves with. When you put on those X-ray vision glasses that Dr. Peikoff is talking about, and there are certain rules he gives us in the first part of this essay that I think are important. When you're trying to figure out from a letter or from an internet post on Facebook or a tweet on Twitter, what's really going on, look, for example, at words you wouldn't use yourself in making the description, and ask yourself, why wouldn't I use that formulation? Only go by what the person is actually saying, and try to integrate all that they're saying into a philosophically consistent, and ask yourself, what is the premise that would integrate that would make sense of that unusual use of language or that specific approach? Because very often, as I say, writers on purpose will not state out loud their philosophical premises. They will sometimes hide them, or they will assume them and just expect people to, it's like those bromides that Ayn Rand goes through in Philosophy Who Needs It. Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Who can be certain of anything? Well, those kind of premises are kind of snuck in here, and it's getting underneath those sort of assumed philosophical premises that this exercise is so powerful at revealing. And yet we can see when we do that penetrating analysis, this guy's not our friend. He's our enemy. He opposes the idea of benevolent universe. and that success in a free society is what we should naturally expect. He thinks our resources are boundless. Success is a matter of luck. He thinks that ideology and philosophy can't be trusted. We're really not certain about anything. Given that metaphysics and epistemology, it leads him necessarily to vast compromises with statism and a praise for the early American progressives, either Republican or Democrat.
And I just want to thank Ayn Rand one more time because I mean, she has helped me understand and be able to detect. I mean, when I first read this last night, just the letter, and I took some moments to kind of think about, what am I detecting here? What am I seeing? What's going on here? And I'm kind of happy to know that a lot of what I thought at that time was what Leonard Peikoff said, because I had not read this before. But Leonard Peikoff, he sums this up so nicely. He says, whether or not, whether he knows it or not, that philosophy shapes the author's conclusions on all the concretes he is interested in. And it is communicated indirectly by suggestion, connotation, and feel to the unwary reader who may nod approvingly as he reads, while hearing the word freedom, while having no idea of the lethal ideas he is ingesting in the process. This, unfortunately, is the method of which basic philosophical ideas today usually pass from one man to another. The antidote is philosophical detection. Boom. I mean,
boom, mic drop.
Boom. It's just, but I mean, because I honestly, Jimmy, let me just call you Jimmy.
Please.
So I can't imagine what my life would have, how gray and sad my life would have been without Ayn Rand, because I am a thinker. I do like to know what is behind ideas. And what philosophy is about. And I from the time that I was, 13, I started thinking this way, and goodness knows it would have been such a horrible time without Ayn Rand. And to think, that most people, as Leonard Peikoff says, pick up philosophical ideas in that sort of unthinking way is kind of sad.
Philosophy is everywhere.
Yeah.
Philosophy is everywhere. You really can't escape it. I can't look at an advertisement on a billboard. I can't, much less read a newspaper article, without having philosophy be the necessary lens that helps me interpret it. Absent that lens. Now, sounds like you were already off to a thoughtful start. I know I was kind of off to a thoughtful start too, but I could never have developed powerful, penetrating X-ray vision glasses that without Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff. They were the ones who got me to see how I can get underneath the ideas and see the philosophical premises at work that most people, they're purely invisible to most people. So it's a wonderful, wonderful article. I urge everyone to go back and read this article and try to practice it in their own life. When they see something that, yeah, there's someone making a position here, it seems to be an integrated position, but I can't put my finger on what bothers me about it. Or there's some word or two that I didn't use and I think were inappropriate here. Or there was something about his logic that's missing here, but I need to identify. That is exactly where we need to put on our philosophy glasses. Ask ourselves, what's the epistemology? What's the metaphysics? What are the meta-ethical premises that are underlying this? Because almost always, if there is even a semi-consistent position on the part of the writer, it will be a matter of philosophy. And you'll see that their politics or their ethical conclusions are just the natural outgrowth of these philosophical premises that may have gone unnoticed completely.
Absolutely. And now if anybody is saying, I want to read this, but I'm having a hard time tracking down a copy of the Objectivist Form, you go to Harry Binswanger's website, you order a copy of it. It's a big book. It's not cheap. You should have that on your shelf. But if you don't already, again, go back to Philosophy Who Needs It and read chapter 2, the article that inspired this whole response, Philosophical Detection. If I could just read a paragraph from the end of that. She's advocating that you keep an active mind in interpreting and understanding. She says, if you keep an active mind, you will discover, assuming that you started with common sense rationality, that every challenge you examine will strengthen your convictions. that the conscious, reasoned rejection of false theories will help you to clarify and amplify the true ones, that your ideological enemies will make you invulnerable by providing countless demonstrations of their own impotence. No, you will not have to keep your mind eternally open to the task of examining every new variant of the same old falsehoods. You will discover that they are variants or attacks on certain philosophic essentials. She goes on, absolutely a must read. Again, chapter 2 of Philosophy, Who Needs It? Philosophical Detection. And Leonard's use of that in these two articles, this two-part article in the Objectivist Forum, is just, it's a dazzling example of, if you weren't sure what this looks like in real life, just read this.
Exactly.
So good.
Exactly. I myself, of course, have, and I would urge everyone to get it. I think they're now even available in bound volumes, but I've even got my old original copies of the Objectivist Forum, the complete collection. But
Nice.
It's easy to acquire. But this is one of the more, usually the essays we discuss are either available through the Ayn Rand Institute courses website as lectures from Leonard Peikoff, or they've been reprinted in books. This is one of the articles, though, that really is only available in the Objectivist Forum. There it is, the bound volume. And
Absolutely worth having.
Yes, I urge everyone to get it.
At the last OCON, they had the Ayn Rand newsletter, the Objectivist Forum, and I think what the other two books. Anyway, they had them for an inexpensive amount.
Yeah,
so
they're really inexpensive, really affordable. Another reason to come to
Institute.
OCON, join us in DC.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of reasons to come. We had so much fun the last time I was at OCON and at Cleveland with you guys. It was such a fun experience. And so I want to echo that too.
Cleveland was really special.
It's so wonderful.
You'll meet and interact with some of the most benevolent, intelligent, warm-hearted human people like Robert and Amy Nasir, who are some of the most wonderful, loving people you'll ever meet in your life. Come meet a community of people like that. Come to find a chance to come to an OCON. You will appreciate it for the rest of your life. Trust
yes, and the same evaluation of your character, Jimmy Valliant. I love it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, do we have any other super chat questions?
No, that was it for the super chat. Again, there's some great comments in the chat, but no, that was it for the super chat. Thank you again to Mary Elaine and to Michael Sweet.
Yeah.
Very much appreciated. Anybody else, again, if you're not already a member, AynRandCenter.co.uk.
Yes.
Sign on. I haven't mentioned that you will be in the communication network and not just emails, but the people who are members stay in touch through the WhatsApp app in groups you can't be part of unless you are a member. But once you are, all sorts of information, all sorts of sharing of resources, really, you can sign up for anywhere from £10 to £100 a month. Every level is worth being a part of. Good stuff. We talk about OCON, but just being a member of the ARC UK, and ARC UK, of course, is working directly with ARI. I've said for the last year, we used to have the problem of, I'm an objectivist, but I don't know that many objectivists around me. And there aren't that many resources. I'm waiting for that next tape set to come out, that next, series of books to come out. And now the biggest problem we have is there's so much good quality content being produced by good thinkers.
All of it good.
And so much of it is coming out of the ARC UK. It's been an honor to be a part of it.
I have a link in the chat. And I also want to say thank you to Bonnie, who didn't do a super chat, but she actually went ahead and she put in exactly where you can find an exercise in philosophical detection in the Objectivist Forum book.
Excellent.
Thank you. And thank you both for joining me today. You guys are the best. Well, join us at Friday again, a week from now, for another discussion of a Leonard Peikoff essay or lecture. And I have to echo what the Nasirs just said. Please consider becoming a subscriber to Ayn Rand Center UK. We're developing an international community of objectivists, students of objectivism. And if you find value to any of this, please do consider joining. Hit like, hit subscribe, comment, share, and do consider becoming a paid subscriber. The Don Watkins Communication Boot Camp, by itself, is worth the price of admission. So until next week.
And Jimmy, just you'll see us this Sunday at a different time slot.
Oh, that's right. I meant to mention, even though it's not on the ARC UK, our usual Sunday podcast, which a lot of the folks in the chat do watch, we're going to be at 4 o'clock Eastern instead of 6 o'clock Eastern, 2 hours earlier than usual.
For 5 minutes with Robert Nasir and Amy
Yes,
Nasir.
yes. Sorry,
Hey, note.
Amy was determined that we get that plug in there.
Well, lovers of life should follow everything that you guys do. You guys are some of the most benevolent voices on the internet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.